You're watching Eye on Africa here in France 24 and Julia Kim, our top stories this hour. Angola's former president, José Eduardo dos Santos, dies at the age of 79. He's credited with overseeing the country's recovery from a civil war, but leaves behind a bitter legacy of nepotism and rampant corruption. Voters in Congo-Brazzaville head to the polls this weekend to elect the country's National Assembly. We'll get the latest from our correspondent in just a few minutes. And Muslims in West Africa find themselves having to forego a time-honoured tradition to mark Eid al-Adha, rising inflation making the customary sheep dish unaffordable for many families. But first, Angola's former president, José Eduardo dos Santos, has died at the age of 79 after suffering a cardiac arrest. He was credited with bringing peace to the country, but his 38-year reign over Africa's second-largest oil producer was marred by rampant corruption. Dos Santos funneled vast amounts of wealth to his family while leaving his people in abject poverty. France 24's Sophie Lamotte takes a look back at his legacy.
This is where he spent his last few days, in a private hospital in Barcelona. José Eduardo dos Santos was a Marxist revolutionary in his youth. He took up arms against the Portuguese colonial rule at the age of 16. He joined and rose through the ranks of Angola's liberation movement and then political party, the MPLA. He became head of state unexpectedly when in 1979, then President Agostinho Neto died during cancer surgery. Many Angolans will remember him as a peacemaker after he brought peace to the country in 2002, ending a decades-long civil war.
We are going to continue the work begun by our late leader Agostinho Neto, the work which President dos Santos himself continued.
His name is also associated with corruption and human rights abuses. Despite huge oil wealth, Angola remains one of the most unequal countries in the world. More than 2/3 of its population lives below the poverty line. Opponents blame rampant corruption and nepotism. He came under particular scrutiny in 2020 when investigative journalists probed the Rwanda leaks. Their work led to accusations that the former president's daughter, Isabel dos Santos, had embezzled public money.
The president basically privatized the state in favor of his family, a few cronies. For these individuals, it's all about having the country's resources at their disposal to have the same lifestyle as the richest people in the world have, with no care for what happens to the people.
His death comes at a particularly sensitive time for the country, which is preparing for general elections in August 2022. Despite the mixed reputation of Eduardo dos Santos, current President Lorenzo has declared a 5-day period of national mourning.
A Guinean judge on Friday has found 3 political leaders not guilty of contempt of court after criticising the prosecutor's office and the military-appointed parliament on social media. The defendants, who are leaders of an influential political and civil society coalition, were arrested during a press conference on Tuesday. Their detention prompted 2 days of violent protests. The defendants were released this Friday following a trial in the capital, Conakry. Our correspondents have the reaction from the courthouse.
Silla, alias Fonike Menge. Alpha Mindiaouba, alias Jani Alpha. Et Mamadou Biloba, non coupable.
Oumar Silla, Diani Alpha, Mamadou Bilouba are not guilty of the acts of public insults, contempt of court, disturbance of public order and public security. I order their release.
You can't arrest people for making jokes, people who are supposed to be powerful. I think that in Guinea we have to let go of emotions a little bit. It was a sad way to intimidate pro-democracy activists. It's not a good sign.
Well, the first round of legislative and local elections in Congo-Brazzaville will be held this Sunday. The ruling Congolese Labour Party is expected to retain its absolute majority in the National Assembly. It's currently led by incumbent President Denis Sassou Nguesso, who has been in power since 1997. France 24's Clément Bonnereau has the details.
More than 2,000 candidates are running for 151 seats in the National Assembly, Congo-Brazzaville's lower house of parliament. Many are running for the first time, and among them, the sons and daughters of key political figures in the country, such as Vadim Mvuba, the son of the current president of the National Assembly, as well as Stella and Andrea Sassou Nguesso, two daughters of President Denis Sassou Nguesso. The campaign has been marred by the exclusion of several candidates from the election, including a candidate of the ruling party, the Congolese Labour Party, who was accused of stirring ethnic tensions. It should be noted that several opposition parties are boycotting the election, as in previous elections. Meanwhile, the ruling Congolese Labour Party, which has been in power for half a century, is expected to retain its absolute majority in the National Assembly. It currently holds 90 out of 151 seats. Turnout will be something to keep an eye on. Many Congolese people telling us that they will either cast a blank vote or decide not to vote at all.
Now, in its latest report, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission said it's documented widespread murder, ethnic and sexual violence in the 12 months to June across Africa's second most populous nation. The Commission reported that women, children, the elderly and people with disabilities were not spared. Ethiopia faces instability in several regions, notably in Tigray, where government forces and their allies have been mired in a bloody conflict with the Tigray People's Liberation Front since November 2020.
In the context of the war in Ethiopia, all parties to the conflict have committed serious international human rights and humanitarian law violations against civilians. In areas where the conflict took place, the right to live, the right to security of person, the right to justice, and the right not to be subjected to cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment and/or punishment have been violated by government forces, Tigray forces and other armed groups.
Now, this weekend, Muslim families across the world will celebrate Eid al-Adha. In West African tradition, this religious festival is also known as Tabaski. It's customary for the head of the family to sacrifice a sheep to mark the occasion. But this year, that's going to be a struggle for many. Rising inflation driven by the war in Ukraine has seen livestock prices rise by 30 to 50%. France 24's Sam Bradpiece and Elimin Ndao report from Dakar.
Tabaski is always an expensive occasion, but amid rising inflation, the cost of a sacrificial sheep is beyond reach for many. Mokhtar earns €120 a month and has two children.
My salary is not big enough to buy a sheep for my family. I have to group together with friends to be able to buy a shared sheep for the party.
The cost of sheep has soared in recent months.
Last year I bought a sheep for €230. This year it's cost up to €450.
The war in Ukraine means that the export of animal feed to Africa has fallen, driving up costs.
This year everything's become more expensive. There's no wheat, there's no maize, animal feed costs a lot.
The government has subsidized the cost of feed in a bid to keep costs down.
I want consumers to know that the ministry has been working to ensure that the price range is as wide as possible so that everyone can find a sheep within their budget.
It seems, though, that for many Senegalese people, these efforts haven't paid off.
Rwandan President Paul Kagame has given an exclusive interview to France 24 from the capital Kigali. Amid a major surge in tensions with neighbouring DR Congo, Kagame has hailed recent talks in Angola with Congolese President Félix Tshisekedi, and he's reassured the public that nobody is interested in conflict. But despite striking a positive note there, clashes erupted earlier this week after that meeting between Congolese soldiers and M23 rebels in eastern DR Congo. Let's take a listen to what Paul Kagame had to say to France 24.
I'm happy that we even agreed to meet in Angola under the mediation of President Lorenzo, President of Angola. And indeed, we had a good discussion. I think both sides, at least what I assessed it to be, were looking forward to making progress.
And you can catch the entirety of that exclusive interview with President Paul Kagame on France24.com. Now, she's been nicknamed the Minister of Happiness. Ons Jaber's rise to the Wimbledon final is a welcome ray of good news in Tunisia, which is in the throes of a protracted economic crisis and worsening political tensions. The 27-year-old faces Elena Rybakina in Saturday's showdown, becoming the first African and first Arab woman to reach a Grand Slam final. Her performance has already sparked a surge of enthusiasm for tennis in Tunisia. Let's take a listen.
I never loved tennis. I watched it a little, but I wasn't a big fan. But since Ons Jabeur started playing, I watch it all the time. She made us love tennis.
Ons defied the odds, and I salute her for her perseverance. And I say to her, Ons, you have enlightened us, and you have shown a beautiful image of Tunisia to the whole world.
Well, that's it from us. There's more news coming up here on France 24. Stay with us.